Hey folks, back with another video. Let's dive into what stories got my attention today. Starting with the NATO Beijing story on Tuesday, China said it hopes to engage in dialogue with NATO after news of a new report from the alliance that identifies China as an emerging threat, something I covered in the previous episode. Hua Chunying, a spokesperson for China's foreign ministry, said Beijing does not practice coercion and intimidation as the NATO report suggests. The report, titled NATO 2030, identifies Russia as NATO's top threat but calls for the alliance to increase its focus on China. Quote, China has an increasingly global strategic agenda supported by its economic and military heft, end quote, the report read. The report says China, quote, has proven its willingness to use force against its neighbors as well as economic coercion and intimidatory diplomacy well beyond the Indo-Pacific region. One of the recommendations of the report is that the NATO should build stronger relationships with countries in Asia like Australia, Japan, New Zealand, and South Korea. The report calls for internal NATO discussions about forming a partnership with India, saying South Asian country, quote, shares fundamental interests and values with the alliance, end quote. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg discussed the rise of China at a news conference on Monday. Quote, China is investing massively in new weapons. It is coming closer to us, from the Arctic to Africa. China does not share our values and tries to intimidate other countries, end quote, he said. Now, I think the West has an opportunity here to use our position of strength to get Beijing to implement what I would say would be more proper classical liberal values and reforms in the country, and also to apologize to the people for all the evil they have done to them. I would urge our politicians to think long term and not short term. Now we can use we can use the dialogue as a way to work on the thorny issues that are Hong Kong and Taiwan. Anyway, moving on to Afghanistan. The Afghan government and Taliban representatives have said on Wednesday that they had reached a preliminary deal to press on with peace talks, their first written agreement in 19 years of war. The agreement, while only laying out modalities for further discussions, is considered a major breakthrough because it will allow negotiators to move on to more substantive issues, including talks on ceasefire. The agreement comes after months of discussions in Doha, the capital of Qatar, and negotiations encouraged by the United States. In Afghanistan, the two sides are still at war, with Taliban attacks on government forces continued unabated. Taliban insurgents have refused to agree to a ceasefire during the preliminary stages of talks, despite calls from the Western capitals and global bodies saying that that would be taken up only when the way forward for talks was agreed upon. Last month, an agreement reached between Taliban and government negotiators was held up at the last minute after the insurgents balked at the document's preamble because it mentioned Afghan government by name. The Taliban refused to refer to the Afghan negotiating team as representative of the government, as the Afghan government, as they contest the legitimacy of the administration led by President Ashraf Ghani. Now, Afghanistan has a long path to peace. However, I think it is time for us in the West to leave Afghanistan and urge Afghans to deal with their domestic issues themselves. Moving on into Ethiopia. In a breakthrough a month after deadly conflict cut off Ethiopia's Tigray region from the world, the United Nations on Wednesday said it and the Ethiopian government have signed a deal to allow quote unquote unimpeded humanitarian access, at least for areas under federal government control after the Prime Minister's declaration of victory over the weekend. Now, this will allow the first food, medicines, and other aid into the region of 6 million people that has seen rising hunger during the fighting between the federal and Tigray regional governments. Each regard the others as illegal in a power struggle that has been months in the making. For weeks, the UN and others have pleaded for access amid reports of supplies running desperately low for millions of people. A UN humanitarian spokesman, Saviano Abreu, said the first mission to carry out a needs assessment would begin Wednesday. Ethiopia's government did not immediately comment. More than 1 million people in Tigray are now thought to be displaced, including over 45,000 who have fled into the remote areas of neighboring Sudan. Humanitarians have struggled to feed them as they set up a crisis response from scratch. Communications and transport links remain almost completely severed to Tigray, and the fugitive leader of the defined regional government this week told the AP that fighting continues despite Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's declaration of victory. It remains almost impossible to verify either side's claim as the conflict threatens to destabilize both the country and the entire Horn of Africa. Top US diplomat for Africa, Tibor Nagy, told the BBC, quote, now the danger is this evolving into a long-term insurgency, end quote. He also disagreed with Ethiopia's description of the conflict as a quote-unquote law enforcement operation to arrest the Tigray leader, saying that, quote, it was obviously a military operation, end quote. The fighting between two heavily armed forces has seen airstrikes, rocket attacks, and tanks. Abiy has resisted international pressure for dialogue and de-escalation, saying his government will not, quote, negotiate our sovereignty, end quote. With infrastructure damage, the UN has said some people in Tigray are now drinking untreated water, increasing the risk of diseases. In northern Ethiopia's largest hospital in the Tigray capital of Mekelle, staff had to suspend other activities to focus on treating the large number of wounded from the conflict, the International Committee for the Red Cross said. The ICRC, the rare organization to travel inside the Tigray region and its borderlands, has reported coming across abandoned communities and camps of displaced people. No one knows the true toll of the fighting. Human rights and humanitarian groups have reported several hundred people killed, including civilians, but many more are feared. Now, having declared victory on Tigray after the fall of Mekelle at the weekend, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed shifted focus on Wednesday, meeting political parties to plan next year's election. After the Africa's youngest leader at 44 and the recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize winner for a pact with Eritrea, Abe talked throughout the morning with political parties, civil society groups, and election officials about the mid-2021 vote, his office said. He took Ethiopia's top job after nearly 3 decades of a TPLF-led national government which had become increasingly repressive, jailing opponents and banning opposition parties. Abe removed Tigrayans from government and security posts, saying they were overrepresented for an ethnic group accounting for just 6% of Ethiopia's population. The military went in when a federal army base was ambushed in Tigray. The TPLF accuses Abe of quote-unquote invading Tigray, where federal troops captured the regional capital Mekelle at the weekend, sending TPLF leaders fleeing for the hills. Now, it seems so far that the Abe's government has been successful in the war. His government is working with UN and other organizations to address the immediate issues that the Tigray region is facing, namely food and energy. Hopefully, Ethiopian government can move towards peace now. Moving on into Thailand, the long-awaited decision, Thailand's constitutional court unanimously ruled in favor of Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha on Wednesday in a conflict of interest case brought by the opposition politicians. Prayut was accused of a conflict of interest because he remained in military housing despite his retirement from the army in 2014, months after overthrowing an elected government. Prayut has said he needed to stay there for security reasons. The court said the former army chief's stay in the residence was in line with the army's rules and the safety of the Prime Minister and his family was the government's priority. The quote not guilty verdict end quote. Let me repeat that sentence again. The quote unquote not guilty verdict for Prayut means that he can stay in power. Now, he could not be reached for comment on the verdict. On the other side, even before the court decision was handed down, demonstrators began to gather in Bangkok to respond to the verdict. Now, I expect that the protesters will probably have another enemy in the list, namely the justice system. That's fun. I guess in the coming days we'll find out exactly how the Thailand's protesters will take this news. And finally, moving over into Hong Kong, Joshua Wong, 24, one of Hong Kong's most prominent democracy activists, was jailed on Wednesday for more than 13 months over an unlawful anti-government rally inciting and organizing an unauthorized assembly at a police headquarters last year, the toughest and most high-profile sentence for an opposition figure this year. Fellow activist Agnes Chow was handed a 10-month sentence and another Ivan Lam a 7-month sentence. Agnes Chow, 23, burst into tears when the sentence was read out. The three avoided the maximum sentences of 5 years imprisonment, but Chow now faces her 24th birthday on Thursday behind bars. Former opposition lawmaker Claudia Mo told DW that sentence was slightly shorter than many feared, but added that there has been no attempt made to understand what is driving the pro-democracy movement. On November 23rd, a third charge of taking part in an unauthorized assembly was dropped due to lack of evidence, Wong's spokesman Isaac Cheng said. On Twitter, Nathan Law, a Hong Kong activist now exiled in Britain, said he feared other sentences might be placed on the three and called Wednesday's sentence quote-unquote absurdly heavy. About 100 supporters gathered quietly inside the court ahead of the sentence, while a small group of pro-Beijing people rallied outside, calling for a hefty prison sentence. Rights groups were swift to condemn the court ruling. Quote, by targeting well-known activists from Hong Kong's largely leaderless protest movement, authorities are sending a warning to anyone who dares openly criticize the government that they could be next, end quote, said Amnesty International's Asia-Pacific Regional Director Yamini Mishra. Well-known activist Avery Nang, Secretary General of the group the League of Social Democrats, said that the court's judgment was political. Hong Kong activist Sunny Cheong said Wong's sentence would leave a hole in the democracy movement's fight to be heard. In a social media post earlier in the week, Wong announced he'd been kept in solitary confinement while in remand. Wong, Chow, and Lam, 26, joined Hong Kong's pro-democracy movement when they were in their teens. All three organized large rallies in 2012 against plans to make Hong Kong's education system quote-unquote patriotic and played large roles 2 years later in the quote-unquote umbrella movement, a 79-day peaceful occupation by a student-led movement for universal suffrage. The crackdown has prompted accusations Beijing is violating the autonomy it promised when the former British colony was returned to China in 1997. It also has triggered warnings the ruling Communist Party is damaging Hong Kong's appeal as a global business center and one of Asia's most dynamic cities. Other democracy advocates, including media tycoon Jimmy Lai, have also been arrested under the security law, and the jailing of Wong, Chow, and Lam drew a rebuke from Hong Kong's final British Governor Chris Patten. He said in a statement that it, quote, is another grim example of China's determination to put Hong Kong in handcuffs, end quote. U.S. Senator Marsha Blackburn accused China of cracking down on human rights and destroying, quote, any semblance of autonomy in Hong Kong, end quote. And, quote, keep the faith, Joshua, you are truly an inspiration to freedom fighters everywhere, end quote, Blackburn said in a statement. Reacting to the court ruling, Britain's Foreign Minister Dominic Raab urged Hong Kong and Beijing authorities to stop their campaigns to stifle the opposition. Taiwan's ruling Democratic Progressive Party expressed grave concern over the sentencing. Quote, the DPP emphasizes that what the Chinese Communists and the Hong Kong government have done today is equivalent of declaring that Hong Kong's freedom is dead, end quote, it said in a statement. Now, I believe the way Beijing is behaving in Hong Kong, mostly out of desperation, but whatever the reason, they may lose Hong Kong, or in the least, they may lose Hong Kong as the financial hub, because these kind of chaotic situations can get out of hand very quickly and turn into something that it might blow back in their face. Anyway, that's it for this video. If you liked the video, then hit that like button and hit that subscribe button for future updates. Write in the comment sections your thoughts, criticisms, and anything I might have missed. As usual, the sources to the stories are in the description box below, and I will see you in the next video.